Welcome to Sherlock Mysteries, where every case takes you deeper into suspense, secrets, and thrilling investigations inspired by the world of detectives. If you love solving puzzles and uncovering hidden truths, you're in the right place. Don't forget to subscribe, hit the like button, and tell us in the comments which part of the world you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. Now, let's start the story. It has long been my habit, when picking from my friend Mr. Sherlock Holmes's various chronicles, to skip over those affairs in which the explanation, while sound, depended more on the caprices of fortune than the play of reason. The current history is not the result of chance. It began with a simple absence, so simple that with the best of intentions, Scotland Yard had no idea what to call it at first. An absence of a shadow rather than a person, which every honest Englishman takes for granted. It was a grey morning in late November, the kind of London day that appeared to be made of damp flannel. Our fire burned cheerfully, and Holmes, his long limbs folded into his armchair, was performing delicate surgery on a violin string. He balanced the device across his knee and, using a watchmaker's tweezers, coaxed a new E into submission. The papers lay discarded on the hearthrug. However, I noticed a short paragraph ringed in blue. Pencil. Holmes' method of salting. A page for later harvest. About a mysterious assault near the Strand the night before. Mrs. Hudson had barely disappeared with the morning tray when we encountered the definite tread of a man who believes he is expected by fate, if not by householders. Inspector G. Lestrade came a moment later, as spare as ever, the brim of his hat glistening from the recent rain. His expression was that of a man delivering news he despises but cannot ignore. "Have you read it, Mr. Holmes?" He began without preamble, pointing his chin at the marked column. Holmes didn't look up. "I saw your left cuff, Inspector," he replied calmly. "The chalk on it suggests a close encounter with a pavement last night, and the scuff on your boot indicates you took a header after something, or someone. Please sit down. The kettle still boasts of its usefulness." Lestrade sat down after coughing into a fist. "There's a fancy to it, Mr. Holmes, and I wouldn't have disturbed you for a simple cut-purse. We have our share of them without bothering Baker Street. But I have a constable on the embankment swearing on his oath, and 2 post office clerks ready to swear as well, that the man they chased down Villiers Street cast no shadow when he passed beneath the lamp. No shadow." "Inspector?" I asked. "In the gaslight?" "Electric, Doctor," Lestrade returned grimly. "One of your new arc lamps near Charing Cross, bright as noon. The witnesses say they saw the fellow clear as a signboard, but where his feet should have printed black upon the wet stones, there was nothing. They were near enough to smell something queer about him, too. A reek like burnt eggs. He dodged a cab, slipped between 2 dray horses without a touch, and when they reached the corner, he was gone." Holmes set down the violin and at last honoured the inspector with his eyes. "Pray continue." "The assault was upon a gentleman, Mr. Aloysius Penruddock, a solicitor to certain foreign embassies. Nothing taken but a pocketbook and a small parcel wrapped in black oilskin. We found Mr. Penruddock fainting against the railings. A bruise upon the temple, no blood. He is recovered now, but tight-lipped as a clam about the parcel. Says it was of no value to anyone but himself. I am not so green as to swallow that." "You were right to come," said Holmes. "The paragraph spoke only of a strange deficiency of shadow, reported by excited persons." "What have you not told us?" Lestrade hesitated, and then reached into his coat. From an inner pocket, he produced a narrow slip of glass 2 inches by 1, darkened to a smoky translucence as though it had been held too long above a flame. "This was in Mr. Penruddock's glove," he said. "A man puts odd things in his glove when he is rattled. We should have overlooked it but for the smell. It turns the stomach." Holmes received the glass reverently between forefinger and thumb and held it to the window. A triangle, faint as a watermark, showed itself in the centre. A small, perfect figure cut clean through the smoke. He put the slip to his nose, and a faint wrinkle crossed his features. "Sulphur compounds, Watson, and something of the photographer's bench. Fixer upon the skin, hypo, if I do not mistake. Curious, and you say the lamp beneath which the fellow passed was one of the new arc installations." "Installed last month," said Lestrade. "A marvel, so I'm told. A terror to housebreakers, at any rate. Men have no business going shadowless under them." "No man is shadowless," Holmes murmured, except he contrives to walk with another shadow that is not his own. I confess I shot him a look, for this was precisely the sort of phrase with which he baited his hook before a cast. He placed the slip upon the mantel, flanked it with 2 brass bookends as if to afford it the dignity of a museum label, and turned again to Lestrade. "Describe your quarry. Average height." A light step, quick, not hurried. "Dark coat, the sort city gents favour. Hat pulled low. The constable swears the fellow wore gloves in the rain, and that there was a smear on one cuff like you had rubbed charcoal upon it. The smell I mentioned. And here's the last thing. When he ran across the road, an omnibus lamp took him broadside. Driver says he ought to have cast a bar upon the wheel. There was none. He laughs now because who'll believe an omnibus driver? But he swears it." Holmes steepled his fingers. "You observed the pavement yourself. It was sluiced by that time. For I tell you frankly, Mr. Holmes, we took prints on the north side, clear as a ledger, and then they stopped dead at the curb. Nothing across the way. I've seen men vanish down alleys. I've not seen them step off their own footprints. You have given me a sweetmeat with more flavour than bulk, Inspector," Holmes replied. "I must nibble it from the corners. Mr. Penruddock's address." Lestrade passed a card. "And his parcel?" asked Holmes. "What did he call it?" "A trifle," said Lestrade sourly. "A trifle wrapped as if bound for the bottom of the sea. Oilskin black, sealed with wax. The seal broken by the time we found him. He has since said it was a private curiosity. He will not enlarge." Holmes's eyes had returned to the smoky glass. "A private curiosity with a photographer's stink, an assailant who seems to shed his shadow like an old overcoat, and a street washed of prints where a man has certainly passed. Come, Watson, our hats. Inspector, you will accompany us to Mr. Penruddock and afterwards to the lamp in question. I should like to see a place where shadows are selective." Before we left, Holmes took a small lens from his drawer and, with the delicacy of a jeweller, examined the triangle cut into the glass. "A neat puncture near one corner," he observed aloud, as much to himself as to us. "Threaded, perhaps. And trace crystals adhered to the smoky film, prismatic under the light. Salt from the fixer, yes, but something else. Sand as fine as flour. You were in Villiers Street? Then the embankment is proximate, with all its grit and river gifts. Still, this is not the embankment's sand." He slipped the glass into a paper and tucked it away. As we descended the stairs, he took up his violin for one brief, plaintive phrase, a minor chord that hung in the air like a thought half expressed, and set it down again, as if the note itself had told him nothing and everything. The rain had ceased, but London had kept the memory of it. We rolled in a hansom toward Bedford Row, where Mr. Penruddock kept chambers that looked as if one day they had been aired, and then promptly sealed against time. The gentleman received us with the reluctance of a man who finds himself both aggrieved and ridiculous. He was past 50, with white bristles at the ear and a mouth that snapped shut upon certain words, as if they were morsels unfit for polite company. "You were struck from behind, Mr. Penruddock," said Holmes with a civility that made Lestrade's bluntness seem almost homely. "Pray relive the disagreeable minute for us, omitting nothing that may appear trivial to you and vital to me." "I had just left the station," said the solicitor, after a late consultation. "I had upon my person a document of no value to any thief. I was aware of a step, then a smell most objectionable, like some laboratory run to rot, and then a blow. When I woke, I was sitting on the stones with a policeman tugging at my elbow, asking whether my assailant had been a ghost. It is not a jest I particularly relish." Holmes's attention shifted to the mantel, where a second strip of glass rested on a leather pad, this one unblackened and as transparent as water. He didn't point. He just looked until Mr. Penruddock noticed him. "A memento from yesterday night," Holmes muttered. Penruddock hesitated. "No. A personal curiosity that had previously existed. It has no bearing." "Everything bears," Holmes said softly. "I'd like to borrow that curiosity, and I'll return you with a sliver of assurance. Your assailant chose you not for who you are, but for what you carry. Regarding his desire for shadow, well, some men travel with other men's darkness. There are those males who bring their own light. You speak in riddles, sir," the solicitor snapped. He did, however, give up the glass. When we returned to the street, Holmes's face had taken on that traveller's look I knew so well, as if he were already miles ahead with the case in his pocket, and we, poor Watson and indefatigable Lestrade, were obligated to catch him before dusk. He tapped the pocket containing 2 glass slips, one smoky and cut and the other bright, and stated, "If a man is said to cast no shadow, Watson, our first inquiry must be into the lamp. Our second step into the dirt where the shadow should fall. And third, we'll look at the small objects that men carry and refer to as trifles. For trifles, my dear colleague, are the most immodest of companions. They reveal all." With that, we turned the hansom towards the Strand and the electric glare, beginning the search for a darkness that had seemingly forgotten its master. We discovered the Strand still sweating from the shower, the stones coated in that light oil-sheen shine that London enjoys keeping hidden. The electric lamp in question hummed like a caged creature, with a sharp white eye cast above Villiers Street. Holmes stepped out of the cab without saying anything, and raised his eyes to the device, his head tilted to one side, the slight, bird-like cant I'd come to recognize, with an idea that hadn't yet begged for permission to exist. He walked once around the base, staying to the curb rather than the center of the crossing, and then again narrower, as if a dog would circle the spot where a hare had doubled back. Lestrade, using official gravity, indicated the north pavement where the prince had stopped. Holmes did not immediately look down. He focused instead on the iron column. A small crescent of soot marred the paint 3 feet above my eyeline, no larger than a half-crown. "Someone taught your lamp to weep," he murmured. "Watson, look at the tear track. It starts at the bracket and ends with a thumb's breadth of black on the shaft. Something was fastened here and quickly removed as the carbon sputtered." He placed his fingers lightly on the iron and sniffed. Burnt carbon, of course. "But beneath it, that sour touch you mentioned, Inspector. Not the honest stink of the river, nor the ghost of the sewer. Sulphurous with a sweetish bite from hyposulphite. A photographer has leaned his cheek against your city's new dawn." Lestrade made a face. "Is this a photographer? With a pocketbook and an oilskin parcel, what is his game?" "Mr. Holmes, we've had our fair share of those gentry on Derby Day, but they rarely knock down solicitors." Holmes eventually collapsed to the ground. The prints on the north side were exactly as the inspector described them. Clear, wet ovals that darkened at the toe, indicating a light, forward step. At the curb, the trail came to a halt as if the man had been plucked into the air. Holmes crouched on his heels, holding his lens against the granite lip. "A soldier learns to read the ground," Watson said quietly. "London simply writes in smaller letters." He indicated with his forefinger the narrow gutter where the rain had created a pet brook in the street. On the inner edge, 3 grains clung to the water's retreat as if hesitant to join it. To my eye they were dust. Under Holmes's glass they threw back a pale glint. "Not the river," he said, "and not the coarser grit of a builder's cart. This is flour-fine silica, polished by a wheel. Lens grinder's dust, Inspector. It will cling to cloth like a burr and migrate to a man's wrists when he wipes his hands upon a cuff." As your constable observed, Lestrade's jaw set. "You will tell me next that the fellow carried a lighthouse in his pocket." Holmes smiled with one corner of his mouth. "Nothing so picturesque. Counter-illumination, rather. A trick as old as the stage, but improved by chemistry. If you flood the side from which the lamp would throw your outline, the shadow is eaten like ink under a blotter. Our man contrived to walk with light upon his chest equal to, or slightly greater than, the downcast from above. The stones would show no bar." He pointed with the lens to the soot crescent on the post. Here he hung a reflector or small lantern for a moment, while he adjusted some personal arrangement. He had not time to be tidy. Hence the smear. "You are telling me a man walked along the Strand wearing a lamp," said Lestrade, as if the very words might make them sensible. "Men have walked along the Strand wearing worse," Holmes returned. "A narrow breast lantern in a close coat would serve. A bullseye masked with a smoked slide will throw a sheet of pallid light without winking. The odor we notice proceeds from plates or paper ill-washed, or from fixer spilled upon the lining. Note, too, the witness who remarked gloves in the rain. A man is clumsy with chemicals on his skin and keeps his hands to himself. He moved into the road with that care which appears in him when his mind runs ahead of his body. There, midway between curb and curb, he stopped and stooped again. A fragment of black wax lay on the stone, no bigger than a seed, but its fracture showed the crisp, clean break of a fresh seal. He lifted it on a fingernail. "The parcel, Watson. The C's own dress, oilskin, and the black wax. Here a crumb shook loose when the thing was snatched or torn. Do you see this fleck pressed into it? He held the lens for me. Within the wax, a microscopic triangle was impressed, so faint I should never have noticed it without his incessant goading of my faculties. The same device appears upon the smoky glass from Mr. Penruddock's glove. The triangle is not a fancy. It is a signature. Lestrade's eyes narrowed. A club? A trademark? An alphabet of devices presents itself, said Holmes. Secret societies spend more on pomp. This is trade before it is oath. A lens maker would put triangles all day and not notice he had done it. I should like a list, Inspector, of photographic supply houses within a mile of Charing Cross, and of opticians who grind their own. Ask also at the lanternists' dens, music hall men who require slides and light. There will be one establishment where a clerk's cuff shows the same pale bloom as your own, where a foreman's pockets smell faintly of rotten eggs, where black wafer wax sits in a dish by the ceiling press. We will not be far wrong if we call there before night. Lestrade, to his credit, ceased to protest and began to instruct a constable who had drifted near like an inquisitive gull. Holmes, meanwhile, paced once, twice, and then stood beneath the lamp, raising his hands as if measuring a man's shoulders against the light. He drew from his pocket the clear slip of glass borrowed from Mr. Penruddock and held it in the beam. The triangle, invisible in the unkind daylight, whispered itself into being upon the whiteness, a crisp absence within clarity. Do you see how the cut will admit a thread? He said. A slide so pierced can be hung to darken or to tame a lamp. The smoky specimen from last night is the same, but clouded to soften the glare. Our man courts light and then fears it. He has made a pet of it, teaches it tricks, and yet must screen it lest it bite him in the eyes. A careful fellow in a careless hurry. He let the glass fall back into its paper and clapped the dust from his palms with a briskness that signaled transition. To the embankment, Watson. A man who vanishes between curb and curb has not become angelic. He has gone where a clever workman goes when pressed, down. We examined the iron mouths along the gutter. The second grating to the south wore a new scratch upon its lip and a smear of that same sooty black. Holmes knelt, laid his cheek absurdly to the stone as if listening to the street's breath, and then thrust an arm to the elbow between the bars. When he withdrew his hand, he held a shred of black cloth with a button clinging to it. The cloth was of a dense, close weave. The button bore in minute relief the letters P.O. Post Office, I exclaimed. Holmes weighed it on a finger, or a poor counterfeit meant to mislead. Consider your clerks, Inspector, the two who vouched the shadowlessness. Did our man wear a coat likely to pass unremarked among theirs? He drops into the culvert, crosses to the next mouth and climbs out amid lawful brethren. A trick old as Falstaff's buck-basket. Lestrade's satisfaction was direct and honest. We shall inquire at the sorting office this hour. Holmes responded calmly. If he is among them, he will not be among them. He just borrowed their skin. But we may discover where such a skin is knitted. Send your men. We'll take the other end. And what goal is that, Mr. Holmes? The end with the triangle on it. There is a business whose floor is covered in ground glass as fine as wheat, and whose wash basin is clogged with hypo. There is a counter across from which a small parcel was delivered to Mr. Aloysius Penruddock, in the manner of men who know more than they ask. If we can encourage that counter to speak, we shall know why a gentleman's shadow angered someone so greatly that he must be snatched with his pocketbook. He called a cab, his eyes brilliant in that intimate manner of his, as if the city had given up a syllable, and he was holding the rest of the phrase in his mouth. As we climbed in, the electric lamp hissed behind us, and I recalled thinking, not for the first time, that London's new light seemed to cast deeper shadows than the old ones did. The cab drove us to Charing Cross, its wheels hissing on wet stone, while Holmes sat forward with his chin on his knuckles, his eyes concentrated not on the passing windows, but on an inner screen of computation. I had grown familiar with that silence. It was the silence of a mind accumulating threads too delicate for the rest of us to notice, twisting them into a rope stout enough to pull the truth into sunshine. Lestrade beside me squirmed uncomfortably, as if the silence itself convicted him of incompleteness. When Holmes finally spoke, he addressed the air rather than us. O solicitor entrusted with a parcel of extraordinary secrecy, a robber who conceals himself in light, and the signature of a triangle stamped on wax and glass. There is an economy in it, Watson, and it argues for design. No man carries such devices solely to steal a gentleman's purse. No, the packet was the magnet, and Penruddock was the unfortunate iron it attracted. The hansom came to a halt outside a modest shop front, sandwiched between a tobacconist and a boarding house. Its windows were half-curtain and packed with lantern slides, stereoscopes, and brown bottles of photographic chemicals. Holmes dismounted silently and entered, the bell above the door ringing nervously. Inside, the air was laden with the bitter perfume we had come to associate with our phantom. Behind the counter, a pale young man peered up, his hands still covered in silver nitrate. His astonished gaze flickered from Holmes to Lestrade, then settled into that particular defiance that comes with inadequately concealed guilt. "Good day," Holmes remarked amicably, as if buying a child's toy. "I need certain lantern slides with a triangular aperture and a smoked surface. My friend directed me here." The youth blinked and quickly nodded. "We create such things, sir, but not for public sale. You have an understanding of optical demonstrations." He bent and produced a tiny tray containing several slips of glass, one of which was marked with the familiar puncture at the corner. Holmes's fingertips hovered but didn't touch. He remarked, "Excellent work. And this seal?" He pointed to a block of black wax on the shelf, still warm around the edge where a stick had been pressed. "Trade use, sir," the youth muttered, "to fasten chemical wrappings. Nothing sinister." Holmes leaned across the counter with a startling sharpness. "You sold such a slide last evening, did you not? To a gentleman dressed in a black coat, gloves in the rain, and a stench that made your shop smell thrice larger." The boy's eyes widened and his lips opened, but a voice from the doorway behind him spoke first. "Enough, Thomas," we turned. A middle-aged man stood there, clean-shaven, spectacles glinting, his coat powdered faintly with pale flour. He moved with measured steps, calm but wary, his gaze darting from Holmes to Lestrade with quick intelligence. "I am Mr. Bracknell, the proprietor. My assistant knows nothing about your mission. I served the customer about whom you speak. This is just a demonstration lantern." He paid with good coin. "That's the end of it." Holmes bowed slightly, his eyes half-lidded in that dangerous politeness that I had seen before the unmasking of many a rogue. Indeed. Nonetheless, this customer wanted a slide cut for suspension, and wax suited for secrecy seals. "You are too astute a tradesman not to see the purpose. Tell me, Mr. Bracknell, was it nothing when he requested oilskin sheeting? When he asked how long hypo would cling to a man's clothing?" The proprietor's composure wavered, but did not completely break. "You make inferences, sir. They may be brilliant, but they do not constitute proof." Lestrade stepped forwards, bristling. "Evidence sufficient to search your premises, Bracknell." Holmes raised his hand. "Not yet, Inspector. Let us not frighten the bird until we have located its nest." He turned back to face the man. "What name did he give?" Bracknell's lips tightened. "A tradesman's cells rather than catechizing." Holmes's gaze hardened. "Then I will give you the name. The man you served goes by many names, but to your ears, he used the initials VH, am I right?" The proprietor's quiet was sufficient. Holmes pocketed one of the clear slides with a simple motion, leaving a coin on the counter. "For the time being, we shall refrain from bothering you. Come, Watson." "Inspector, a message from outside." We returned to the raw air, the gas jets sputtering in the mist. Lestrade grabbed Holmes by the sleeve. "Do you recognize him? The man without a shadow?" Holmes's expression was unreadable. "I am aware of him. Victor Haldane, a chemist once respected in the Royal Institution's photography divisions, was sacked over safety concerns. He has a specific obsession with light, believing it can be bent, erased, and even domesticated like an animal. His discharge had left him impoverished and furious. Such men rarely want obscurity. They choose mischief. And Penruddock?" I asked. Holmes peered into the fog, his eyes filled with the fire that only the chase could ignite. "Penruddock's package, Watson, was not insignificant. Within that oilskin lay something Haldane desired so much that he was willing to jeopardize his liberty. Perhaps the continuation of an experiment or the preparations for it. Until we know exactly what, we're groping in his false brightness. But one fact stands out. The assault was no chance robbery. It was an attempt to seize information." Lestrade swore under his breath. "Then our solicitor is holding back more than we expected. Precisely as a result, our next action should be to return to Penruddock and extract the truth about Haldane's gift. rather than to pursue him. He will remain. Without that, we're chasing shadows. Once again, the cab took us through dripping streets to Bedford Row. Penruddock greeted us with much more reluctance than previously, his demeanour that of a man trapped by fate. Holmes did not waste any time on courtesies. "Mr. Penruddock," he explained, "you were attacked last night not by a regular robber, but by Victor Haldane, a former Royal Institution employee. He was looking for the parcel you were carrying, not your purse. If you value your own safety and our efforts to protect you, sir, you will tell us what that parcel contained." The solicitor's hands trembled on the arm of his chair. He looked from one of us to the other, his lips moving silently until he whispered, "It was a glass plate." Holmes tilted his head. "Describe it." Penruddock confessed to having a photographic negative, but not of a portrait nor of a landscape. It was one page from an ancient manuscript. The original is with one of my clients, a wealthy international gentleman. The plate was to be developed abroad, where secrecy could be maintained. I handled the transportation myself. "And the content of this manuscript?" Holmes asked. Penruddock's voice dropped further. "A formula, Mr. Holmes. A formula said to alter the properties of light itself." Holmes's eyes gleamed as he shot me a swift glance. "Then, Watson, we have our motive. A man without a shadow seeks to make the world his laboratory, and a solicitor who keeps secrets in oilskin may yet plunge us all into darkness." Penruddock's confession seemed to draw the very air from the room. For a long moment, there was only the faint hiss of rain against the window and the steady tick of the solicitor's mantel clock, each second falling like the slow drip of some corrosive truth. Holmes stood unmoving, his gaze fixed upon the man as though he could pierce the layers of evasion clinging to him. "A formula to alter the properties of light," Holmes repeated at last, his voice low but edged with steel. "You were carrying not a trinket but a fragment of power, knowledge that in the wrong hands could change the very face of detection, of war, of industry. And you saw fit to cloak it in silence." Penruddock stirred uneasily in his chair, his eyes narrowing with a kind of defensive pride. "I am bound by my client's trust. The manuscript is foreign, ancient, perhaps little more than alchemical fancy. My role was simply to ensure its reproduction remained secret." Holmes bent nearer, his shadow stretching across the solicitor like a pen stroke of judgment. "Foreign, ancient, yet enough to tempt Victor Haldane to strip himself of common humanity and become a creature without shadow. You see, sir, the magnitude of your concealment. Already a man has risked jail for it. Before another night passes, he may risk lives." Lestrade shifted impatiently. "Then hand it over, man. If it's dangerous, we'll put it in safe custody at the yard." But Penruddock shook his head with a firmness born of fear, rather than principle. "I cannot. It is not in my possession now." "The plate was taken." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "Taken entire or merely broken?" "Entire," said Penruddock. "When I awoke on the pavement, the parcel was gone. Yet I believe Haldane may not have triumphed wholly. The plate was unfinished, the development incomplete. Without certain chemical notes which remain with me, it is useless." Holmes straightened, the faintest flicker of relief crossing his features. "Then the game shifts. Haldane holds the image but not the key. You, sir, clutch the key but no longer the image. It is inevitable he will return for you." Penruddock paled dramatically, his lips twitching silently. Holmes turned quickly to Lestrade. "Inspector, you will keep an eye on this house, unobtrusive but consistent. However, I will not rely solely on the legal system. Watson, we are still close at hand." As we left the chambers, Holmes moved quickly down Bedford Row, his coat flying around his knees in the drizzle. His mind was clearly aflame. I had learned to interpret his fast stride as an external reflection of interior calculation. Watson warned that we were on the verge of an intellectual and practical disaster. If Haldane can use light to erase or distort shadows, then every alley becomes a stage for his mischief. He could walk unnoticed through the centre of London. However, even such brilliance necessitates crude collaborators, chemists, tradesmen, and lanternists. Bracknell's establishment gave us the scent. Now we have to track it to its den, but where to look? I asked. Holmes said, "Where a man obsessed with light can find both solitude and supply. Not in broad Mayfair, but in the city's neglected cellars. There are cellars near the river, where lanternists and optical tinkerers gather. I've heard whispers of demonstrations held at odd hours, displaying strange devices for a coin. Such a haunt will provide Haldane with sanctuary. Even as he talked, the cab drove us west through the growing mist. By the time we arrived at the embankment, the lamps were struggling in the fog, their circles of light smudged and shaking. Holmes led us down a short alley beneath the arches of Waterloo Bridge, where the stones sweated with wet and the odour of coal smoke mixed with river mud. We heard a faint murmur, men's voices, a rasp of metal, and the hiss of flame. Holmes touched my sleeve, requesting silence. A wavering sheet of white spilled from a half-open door, brighter than any common gas lamp. He motioned for us to approach, and we looked into the darkness together. A dozen rough benches faced a makeshift stage. A lantern cast a dazzling beam onto a hanging cloth, on which danced silhouettes of grotesque shapes, figures elongated, erased, or twisted into impossible forms. A handful of onlookers, clerks and sailors alike, muttered in amazement, and presiding over the contraption, lean and sharp in profile, was the same man Holmes had named Victor Haldane. He manipulated his lantern with the grace of a magician, sliding plates and adjusting mirrors to create a figure without shadow in an instant, then one that appeared doubled, tripled, and dissolved. His voice was filled with feverish triumph. "Light is the tyrant of perception, gentlemen. But it can be taught obedience. With the right formula, the right glass, we walk unchained from darkness itself." Holmes drew back into the fog, his hand tightening on my arm. "We have found our bird's roost, but a roost alone is not enough. We must learn his next flight. To rush him now is folly. We watch, we listen." For an hour we lingered until the crowd dispersed and the lamps were doused. Haldane gathered his apparatus into crates, his motions deliberate yet tinged with nervous haste. Twice he glanced at a small leather notebook, which he kept close to his breast. Holmes's eyes followed the gesture with hawk-like intensity. When at last Haldane departed, slipping into the fog toward the north, Holmes whispered, "That book contains the missing notes or his attempt to reconstruct them. Either way, it is the bridge between Penruddock's secret and Haldane's ambition. We must have it." We trailed him through the mist, silent as his absent shadow. At Charing Cross he paused, looking about with the wariness of a hunted man, then descended toward the underground. Holmes pressed a coin into a porter's hand, murmured swift instructions, and drew me aside. "Watson, tonight he will vanish beneath the city, but not forever. His apparatus cannot be hidden in a valise. It requires a lair. Tomorrow we shall flush it. For now let him dream himself safe. The greater the illusion, the sharper the disillusion when it breaks." And so we let Victor Haldane pass into the tunnels, carrying with him the ghost of a shadow and the promise of a darkness yet to fall. Holmes's face in the lamplight was unreadable, but his words as we turned back to Baker Street carried both gravity and resolve. "We are not merely chasing a thief, Watson. We are pursuing a philosophy made flesh, a man who believes he can rewrite the laws of light. If he succeeds, London itself becomes his canvas, and every crime may vanish like a shadow at noon. We must reach him before the city learns what it means for a man to walk in brightness and leave no trace at all." The fog had thickened by the time we returned to Baker Street, clinging to the windows like the breath of some giant beast. Holmes shed his coat without a word and went directly to his chemical table, striking a match to a lamp whose steady glow was in striking contrast to the restless flickering we had witnessed under Waterloo Bridge. I poured us each a measure of whiskey, for I felt in need of fortification, and seated myself where I might study my companion. His long fingers moved swiftly, assembling glass vessels and reagents, his face drawn tight in concentration. "We must understand, Watson," he said at length, "what it is that Haldane seeks to perfect. Without that, we shall ever be half a step behind. You heard Penruddock, a formula altering the properties of light. Alchemy, perhaps, but even folly has its method." He took up the smoky slide we had recovered and held it near the lamp. "Observe how the clouding disperses the glare, how the triangle cut serves as anchor for suspension. These are no idle tricks. They are experiments toward invisibility, or something near it." I could not suppress a shiver. Invisibility, was that not the very word most feared in our imaginations? The idea of a criminal walking unseen through crowded streets chilled me more than any knife in the dark. Holmes comprehended my thought. "Watson, this is not real invisibility. Don't let fancy take you astray. It is simply the manipulation of perception. Shadows have been eliminated, shapes softened, and a guy walks but appears disoriented. We've already seen enough to know it's doable. The danger resides in Haldane's conviction that he can turn it into science rather than stagecraft. He put a small amount of acid into a plate and then sprinkled it with the dust he had scraped off the wax fleck. The liquid hissed, emitting a mild sulphurous stench. Holmes hovered over it with his lens, his nostrils flared. Hypo and silica both, just as I anticipated. Watson, with the proper treatment, you can create a slide that not only obscures but actively bends the light around it. That is the crux of Haldane's pursuit. Before I could respond, there was a sharp knock on the door. Mrs. Hudson admitted Inspector Lestrade, his cap wet and his expression stern. He didn't waste time exchanging niceties. "Mr. Holmes, Penruddock has been assaulted again." Holmes straightened, his eyes sharp as knives. "Speak frankly." The watch outside his quarters was found drugged, chloroform in their flasks, no, certainly handed to them by some street hawker in Haldane's payroll. Penruddock himself was found chained in his study. The man scoured the place, but all he took was a bundle of papers from the solicitor's desk. "Penruddock insists they were unrelated to the manuscript, just correspondence. But I've learned to distrust a lawyer's oath." Holmes set his jaw. "Did he hurt Penruddock?" It was only enough to hush him. The man had vanished before the constables resurfaced. There was no indication of him beyond an exposed grating leading into the sewer. Holmes began to pace, each stride measured, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. "Twice in 2 nights, Watson. Our enemy becomes careless. He has the plate and now he has papers. Whether important or small, he considers them useful. He won't stop until he has every piece of the puzzle. This suggests he will act again, and quickly." Lestrade frowned. "Then we need to set a trap." "Just so," Holmes responded. "To bait it, however, we must first understand what Haldane values most. The plate is incomplete without the notes, which are indecipherable without a key. What remains for Penruddock that his adversary cannot yet seize?" We glanced at each other, struck by the same realization. Holmes said it first. "The man himself, precisely. Haldane may take every shred of paper, but only Penruddock has a complete recall of the formula. If he wants to perfect his craft, he must remove it from the solicitor's mind." "Then we set the snare," Lestrade announced. "Give him his chance, and when he takes it, close your jaws." Holmes's stare was chilly. "It's not that straightforward, Inspector. We must choose our location carefully. To wait again in Bedford Row gives Haldane the advantage of familiarity. No, it is preferable to transfer Penruddock under the guise of safety and house him in a location where we can control every access. Baker Street will not serve. Haldane is well aware of this, but I recall a warehouse near the river. Long abandoned, but for my own periodic experiments. Its windows may be covered and its approaches monitored. There we may invite our guest." By the following afternoon, all arrangements had been completed. Penruddock, pale and trembling, surrendered to the plan with the resignation of a man who sees no other option. He was imprisoned in a room lit only by a solitary lamp, while Lestrade stationed men in the darkness outside. Holmes and I remained in an upper loft, staring out the shutters at the silent Thames below. Hours have passed. The night grew deeper, the fog thicker. Then Holmes touched my arm. "Do you hear it, Watson?" At first I heard nothing but the creak of timbers. Then came a faint metallic rasp, like the scrape of iron against stone. A thread of the same sulphurous scent we had previously detected drifted up from below. Holmes's eyes glittered. "He's here." The lamp in Penruddock's chamber flickered sharply, as if smothered by an invisible hand. Through the slats I saw a figure gliding forward, hat pulled low, coat buttoned high, and a faint pallid glow around his breast that made the shadows recoil. No outline fell on the floor. He moved as if devoid of substance. Holmes jumped to his feet, signaling to Lestrade's men. "Now, Watson, quietly." But Haldane was faster than I had imagined. Even as the constables burst in, he flung down a tiny canister, filling the room with stifling smoke. Figures staggered and cursed, blinded by the sting. Through the haze I saw him seize Penruddock and press his head back as if to compel a confession. Holmes leapt down the stairs 2 at a time, disappearing into the cloud. I followed, revolver drawn, heart pounding. Shapes appeared and vanished amid the murk. A shattering of glass, a shout, and then silence. When the smoke cleared, Penruddock was gasping on the floor, free but shaken. The window was shattered and night air streamed in. There was no sign of Haldane except for a smear of soot on the sill and a single object left behind, a leather notebook that had fallen during his flight. Holmes stooped and lifted it with his gloved hand. His eyes scanned the cramped lines inside, and I noticed his face harden with grim understanding. He quickly closed it and slipped it into his pocket. We baited the trap, Watson, but the quarry snapped and broke away. Still, he leaves us with his teeth marks. Within these pages is the shape of his fixation. He won't quit it. He'll return. And when he does, we must be prepared, not just with a net, but also with knowledge of the very light he strives to master. He peered out into the fog, where the smashed glass revealed nothing but darkness. The chase was far from ended, and I could already feel the chill of a city where one man went unnoticed, training even shadows to defy their masters. Holmes did not speak until we were back in Baker Street, the damp fog following us like a persistent phantom. He placed the retrieved notepad on his desk and secured the door against disturbance. Only then did he open it, his long fingers carefully turning the pages, as if each may hold a charge powerful enough to burn the room. I leaned closer, attempting to read the dense, crabbed lettering. Haldane's hand was splattered with smudges of nitrate and grease, and the words were a mix of chemical equations and frenzied notes. Holmes whispered, "This is the mind of an unbalanced genius. See, Watson, hypo coupled with silica vapor, observations on refractive indices, and designs of lantern contraptions with mirrored sleeves. And there, a fragment of the manuscript copied by Penruddock's plate. The symbols seem medieval, yet alongside them Haldane scribbles modern scientific values. He intends to combine superstition and optics into a new alloy. What exactly does it mean in practice?" I inquired, uncomfortable about Holmes's intense study of the pages. "That a man may walk in dazzling light while denying the earth his shadow. That he may appear dislocated, deformed, and untrustworthy as he stands before you. Haldane is obsessed with mastery of perception. And as you can see, he mentions in this section that the completed recipe requires a catalyst which he has yet to obtain from Penruddock. Without it, his work fails. With it, he considers himself invincible." Lestrade, who had been hovering expectantly, tapped his finger on the page. "Can't we utilize it to track him down? Publish these symbols and alert the city?" Holmes closed the book firmly. "To spread such knowledge would be like scattering sparks in a powder room. No, Inspector. The fewer people realize this, the better. Our aim is to use Haldane's own infatuation against him. He's escaped our grasp twice, but each time he leaves something of himself behind. He can't help but show off his intelligence. Pride is the breach in his lantern, through which we must strike." He stood abruptly and walked the carpet, hands clenched behind his back. "Consider, Watson. He vanished into the sewers twice. He has utilized smoke twice to evade capture. These are hardly the habits of a man at home in the daytime. He has transformed himself into an underground creature, living in areas where light can be controlled. As a result, if we are to catch him, we must force him above into the light where he cannot bend. And how?" I asked. "Present him with attractive bait. Penruddock's memory is valuable, yet it can be manipulated. Haldane craves certainty. If he discovers that a complete transcription of the manuscript will be delivered to a secure location under guard, he will strike. We will arrange such a convoy, but the guard will not be as he expects." Lestrade brightened at this, though I could see a flicker of doubt in his eyes. "So this is a decoy. But who will carry it?" Holmes turned to me with that faint, sardonic smile that always made my heart race. "Who better than the one man whose fidelity is unquestionable? My dear Watson, you will be the courier." I admit I started because while I had long been aware of Holmes's dangers, the prospect of becoming the quarry for a shadowless man was not appealing. But his gaze brooked no refusal, and I felt the weight of our responsibility. "Very well," I replied quietly. "Tell me what I must do." The following evening found me attired in a sober black coat, a leather portfolio clasped under my arm. Within it lay no ancient formula, but blank sheets weighted to suggest substance. Holmes had arranged that word of my errand would reach ears friendly to Haldane's spies. The manuscript, it was said, was to be conveyed to a vault within the Bank of England. Lestrade's men shadowed me at a distance, while Holmes himself had vanished, leaving only the brief assurance that he would be near. The streets were thick with fog once more, the lamps glowing like coins seen through milk. I kept to my pace, striving for calm, though each echo of a footstep behind me set my nerves jangling. At Chancery Lane I paused beneath a lamp, pretending to consult my watch. The pavement about me seemed empty, yet a prickle at my nape told me eyes were upon me. Then it came, the faintest shift of brightness, as though the lamp itself had sighed. A figure detached from the gloom, its outline wavering, the ground beneath it untouched by any bar of shadow. Victor Haldane stood before me, his breast faintly aglow, his face gaunt with sleepless fervor. "You carry what I require, Doctor," he said softly. "Give it me, and no harm will befall you." I tightened my grip upon the portfolio. "I carry nothing but duty, sir." His lips curved in a smile that held no warmth. "Then duty shall be your undoing." He reached within his coat and drew forth a small lantern, its shutter half open, spilling a pallid sheet of light that seemed to eat the shadows about us. My own outline wavered upon the stones, thinned as though I too might dissolve. A sharp shriek broke through the fog before he could proceed any further. Now Lestrade, and Holmes was on him, emerging from the shadow of a doorway like a striking hawk. The lantern was smashed to the stones in an instant, its glimmer extinguished. Constables closed in from both sides, truncheons raised, but Haldane fought like he was possessed. With one hand he tossed another of his smoke canisters, creating a stifling mist on the street. Shapes spun and staggered as yells broke out. I saw him rushing for the grating at the curb, the same escape he had used twice before. Holmes's voice echoed above the din. "Block the sewer! Drive him to the light!" Men charged to obey, but Haldane, desperate, clutched at the iron cover with ferocious power. For a minute it appeared that he might vanish again. Then Holmes grabbed him by the collar and dragged him back into the open. The two fought fiercely, the pale chemist twisting with almost inhuman agility. But Holmes remained firm, his lean frame taut with determination. Lestrade's men closed in, and the guy without a shadow was carried to the ground. His arms pinned. When the smoke cleared, he lay breathing. His coat ripped apart to show a primitive gadget attached to his chest, a lamp with mirrors and optics, powered by a small battery. Holmes went over it, inspecting it with rapid precision. "The devil's harness," he replied sadly. "Watson, see how it projects a counterglow to eat his shadow." Ingenious, but not perfect. Lestrade snapped the cuffs around the prisoner's wrists. Haldane scowled at us, his eyes filled with thwarted pride. "You may confine me," he growled, "but light is not yours to command. Others will follow." Holmes straightened, his face inscrutable. "Perhaps, but tonight, Mr. Haldane. London maintains her shadows." As they led the prisoner away, the fog grew colder, despite the fact that the lamps remained lit. Holmes placed a hand on my arm. "You did good, Watson. The danger was real, but the principle remains. No trick of light can survive when truth is brought to bear. Still, I'm afraid this isn't the last time we've heard of men using science to cover up their crimes." He peered once more into the mist, where the city lay restless and uneasy. The struggle was over for the time being, but in his eyes I saw a reflection of something larger, an awareness that knowledge itself could be twisted into peril, and that it would always be his responsibility to guard against it with reason, vigilance, and an unwavering pursuit of the truth. The hansom that transported us back to Baker Street carried more silence than speech. Lestrade had left with his prisoner, his satisfaction obvious. However, Holmes, despite appearing composed, sat with his arms folded, and his gaze fixed on the streaming lamps beyond the window, his brow drawn with a tension I had come to recognize. Despite the fact that victory had been secured, he did not appear to be satisfied. When at last we reached our rooms, he went directly to the desk and withdrew Haldane's leather notebook from the drawer where it had been secured since the night of the warehouse attack. He set it upon the table as one might a chess piece not yet brought into play. "Watson," he said at length, "the man is captured, but the idea remains loose. Mark my words, prisons have contained bodies. They have never yet contained knowledge. You fear another may take up his work. I fear more than that. Haldane himself was but one link in a chain. Did you note how readily he secured apparatus from Bracknell? How he moved among lanternists and clerks as though they knew him? No invention grows in isolation. There is a circle, however small, who have glimpsed his methods. And now the city whispers of the man without a shadow. That whisper alone may tempt others to experiment where he failed. I confess the thought chilled me, For already the tale had the shape of rumour, the sort of grotesque novelty which London chews with appetite. Holmes opened the notebook once more and spread the pages. His long finger traced a line of cramped script. Here, Watson, lies the unfinished chord. He wrote of a catalyst, a missing component from the ancient manuscript. Without it, his harness falters. With it, he believed he might render not only shadowless forms, but shapes wholly displaced, outlines shifted from their bodies. Such a notion, though extravagant, could have consequences I scarcely care to imagine. And Penruddock? I asked. If the manuscript was foreign, might it not already have travelled further than we know? Holmes regarded me keenly. Your question strikes the heart of it. Penruddock is no mere solicitor conveying a client's papers. He is custodian of knowledge, whose origin he has deliberately concealed. His silence nearly proved fatal. We must press him again, and with greater severity. The following morning we repaired once more to Bedford Row, Lestrade meeting us there with a scowl. He had lodged Haldane securely in Newgate, but the man's fervour had not abated. He had spent the night raving of light without shadow, a prophet crying in his cell. Penruddock received us with evident dread. His hands trembled as he gestured us into the chamber, and he seemed already to anticipate Holmes's questioning. "Sir," Holmes began without ceremony, "the time for discretion is ended. You told us the manuscript was ancient and foreign. In truth, from whence does it come?" The solicitor's lips tightened, then parted in a sigh of defeat. "Very good. The manuscript is held in Prague, not in England. It belongs to a client whose family has kept it for centuries, a relic from an alchemist who is supposed to have served Emperor Rudolph. Its pages are loaded with weird symbols, many of which are meaningless, but a few, too few, have an unsettling resemblance to modern equations. My client was concerned that publishing would encourage unsafe experimentation, so he asked me to oversee a cautious reproduction disguised as legal communication." "And how did Haldane learn about it?" Penruddock's eyes fluttered. "I can't say with sure, perhaps due to my own indiscretion, or by bribing the clerk who handled the correspondence. But he understood enough to follow me." Holmes leaned forwards, his voice low. "The plate he stole from you is not whole. But tell me, was there a missing catalyst?" Penruddock hesitated and then nodded. "Yes, the document refers to a material called lux salis, or the salt of light. I took it as a metaphor. However, in the margin was a later handwritten note describing a crystal preparation dissolved in spirit. I couldn't decipher it completely. I did not think it was practical." Holmes's eyes glittered. "Haldane followed it as if it were the philosopher's stone. That, Watson, is when genius turns dangerous, when it gives life to metaphor." Penruddock hid his face in his palms. "Then even in prison he'll keep dreaming about it." "Precisely. Dreams, when shared, can become contagious. That is why we must close every avenue through which this knowledge could escape." Lestrade, impatient, announced that the Yard would vigilantly protect Penruddock and his files. However, Holmes did not appear satisfied. As we left, he murmured, "He speaks truth enough, but not the whole truth. We are still missing a piece." That night, Holmes sat late, studying both the notebook and the clear slide he had borrowed from Penruddock. The lamplight brought his profile into sharp focus, and I saw the determination of a man who will not stop until the pattern is complete. He finally laid down the lens and turned to face me. "Watson, there is still an unvisited lair. Haldane's device was basic but effective. He couldn't have perfected it in public. He conducted his trials in a workshop somewhere in this city. Until we find it, we will never know the full extent of his knowledge. What if he has accomplices? Then we can anticipate that workshop to revive anew, even while he is imprisoned in Newgate. That's the danger. Men may be trapped, Watson, but ideas can fly." The next day, Holmes led me through London to the squalid warrens south of the river, where old warehouses stood like tired sentinels against the fog. He questioned rag-pickers, costermongers, and rivermen with quiet persistence until he came across a clue, a night watchman who claimed to have seen strange glows seeping from the shutters of a derelict warehouse near Blackfriars and heard the hiss of chemical fires within. Holmes's face lit up with grim satisfaction. "That, Watson, will be our destination. We'll come in tonight and see if London's shadows hide more than one man's madness." As dusk fell, we approached the building, its windows dark and its timbers streaked with mildew. A tiny hint of sulfur lingered around the entrance, as if it had absorbed into the wood itself. Holmes placed his hand on the latch, his eyes gleaming in the half-light. "Whatever we find within, Watson, will reveal whether Haldane was a lone dreamer or the herald of something larger. Prepare yourself, for here the case may yet cast a shadow longer than any we have known." The door yielded with a reluctant groan, the rusted hinge protesting as though it had long ago grown accustomed to secrecy. A damp draught met us, carrying with it the bitter tang of burnt sulfur and the sharp sting of nitrate. Holmes slipped inside first, his lantern shielded with a hand so that its glow was a thin slit upon the darkness. I followed, revolver in pocket, my senses taut with the knowledge that the air itself seemed charged with hidden design. The interior was a vast, echoing chamber, its beams heavy with dust, the floor littered with scraps of glass and paper. Yet amid the ruin there was evidence of recent work. Benches set with retorts and flasks, copper wires snaking into crude batteries, and a canvas screen upon which some distorted outline had been projected in charcoal smears. The place reeked of obsession. Holmes moved methodically, his keen eye drinking in each trace. He paused at a bench where several lantern casings lay disassembled, their mirrors blackened with soot. With delicate fingers he lifted one lens, holding it to the beam of his lamp. Crystals clung to the glass, glimmering faintly like powdered frost. "Luxalis," he whispered, "our metaphor-made substance. You see, Watson, the preparation Penruddock dismissed has here been attempted in earnest. Haldane may not have perfected it, but others have worked beside him." I glanced about uneasily. "You believe he had accomplices?" Holmes's expression was grim. "The apparatus is too varied for one man's hand. Say, this coil was soldered by a tradesman, that slide etched with professional precision. Haldane provided the fever, but others supplied the craft. We faced not a solitary visionary, but a small cabal." At that moment a sound reached us, the faint scrape of a boot upon stone. Holmes extinguished the lantern in an instant, and we crouched in the dark, listening. Footsteps moved across the floor below, unhurried yet purposeful. A match was struck. Then the flare of a lamp revealed a figure cloaked in heavy coat and muffler, his features obscured. He crossed to the bench, leafed swiftly through a sheaf of papers, then slipped them into his breast pocket. Holmes's hand curled around my arm. "Stay still. We must observe before acting." The intruder worked with practiced surety, picking specific slides and vials while discarding others. He whispered to himself in a dialect I didn't recognize, harsh consonants that seemed foreign to my ears. When he finally turned toward the door, Holmes moved like lightning. He was on top of him in 2 strides, his hand clamping around the man's wrist with iron grip. Holmes replied coldly, "You will oblige us, sir, by remaining." The muffler slipped, revealing a haggard face with high cheekbones and fanatical eyes. He struggled briefly before stilling, his lips curling into a smile. "You're too late," he said in badly accented English. "The task is bigger than one man." Shadows fall everywhere. Holmes pushed him into a chair, his eyes as keen as steel. "Your name?" The man tilted his head mockingly. "You may call me Carroll, that's enough." Holmes quickly examined the pockets and recovered the stolen papers. He perused them, and I noticed his jaw tighten. "Watson, these are diagrams of the completed apparatus, refined beyond what Haldane wore. See here for mirror alignment, a portable harness and lens treatment. Haldane had a dream about commanding the shadows. This man and his buddies intend to improve it." Carroll's eyes shone with triumph. "You can't stop it. We have all we need while others wait across the water. London represents simply the beginning." Holmes observed him silently before binding his wrists with cord and turning to face me. "This supports my suspicions, Watson. Haldane was only the spark. The fire has already spread elsewhere." We led our hostage to the yard, where Lestrade greeted him with both satisfaction and fear. The inspector quickly clapped him in a cell, but his eyes showed concern as he listened to Holmes's statement. "If what you claim is correct, Mr. Holmes, this is not a typical case of assault and theft. We have stumbled into something larger." "Exactly," Holmes responded. "We must treat it as a contagion, suppress the rumors, conceal the details, and protect every scrap of evidence. Knowledge is more destructive than explosives." That night, back at Baker Street, Holmes worked until the early hours, copying passages from the notebook and burning others in the grate. I watched the pages curl and blacken, uneasy at the damage but knowing its necessity. He barely paused to say a few words. "There is a balance, Watson. Science is meant to serve humanity, but in the wrong hands it may become a dictator. Our responsibility is not just to solve crimes, but also to prevent them before they occur." When he finally sank into his chair, violin across his knees, the first pale light of dawn crept into the room. He drew the bow across the strings, and the sound was low and searching, like the voice of a man who has seen depths beyond human comprehension. I documented these events with the knowledge that, while Victor Haldane was in Newgate and Carroll was in the Yard's custody, the case was far from over. Others in Europe's dark alleys and secret chambers aspired to walk without a shadow. And Holmes, with the melancholy foresight that was always his gift, realized that we had not only quenched one man's madness, but also discovered the first stirrings of a movement. His final words lingered in my ear as I turned off the lamp and settled in for the night. "The true enemy, Watson, is not the man carrying the lantern, but the possibility that others will make it brighter. We won the night, but the morning will bring its own shadows." Holmes was not one to let the dust of a case settle on his desk, especially when he detected currents still moving beneath the surface. The morning after Carroll's capture, he was already on the move, sending telegrams to acquaintances in Prague, Vienna, and Paris, men of learning and obscure trades who dealt in manuscripts, optics, and chemical curios. His energy was boundless, but beneath it I detected a sense of unease. It was unusual to see him question the extent of his victory, and even more unusual to hear him speak, as he did now, of ideas slipping past prison bars like light through a shutter's crack. By noon, a response had arrived from Prague. A scholar of antiquities confirmed that the manuscript of which Penruddock spoke existed, preserved in a cloister library, but jealously guarded by a noble family. Copies, however, were said to have been made in secret over the last century, with fragments passing from hand to hand among alchemists and charlatans. It was no surprise, then, that echoes of its contents reached Haldane and his friends. Holmes touched the telegram with his long forefinger. "Do you see, Watson? The danger is not in a single parchment, but in the scattering of its seeds. Wherever one lands, some hungry mind will try to cultivate it. Our task is to determine how many such fragments exist and who is currently tending to them." That afternoon we visited Newgate, where Haldane awaited trial. The jailer led us down echoing corridors, his lantern casting bars of yellow across the damp stones. Within his cell, the chemist sat cross-legged upon the straw, his face pale but his eyes burning with undimmed fervor. He looked up as Holmes entered, and a smile curved his lips. "So, the great detective," he said softly, "you think you have caged me, but it is not I who matter, it is the light. The light will walk free." Holmes looked at him with a serene demeanor that belied his watchfulness. "You had collaborators, Haldane. Carroll is someone we know. Who were the others?" The prisoner uttered a little giggle. "You'll never find them all. They are not criminals under your definition. They are educated guys who refuse to submit to superstition or the law. You call it crime, and they call it development." Holmes' voice became sharper. "Progress begins in the darkness and ends in devastation. Where is the workshop's genuine master?" Haldane moved closer, his chains creaking. "You think I am the master? I was only the herald. Others are already preparing the lens, salt, and harnesses. Across the sea, across the continent, London will soon be joined by other cities where shadows expose their owners." Holmes turned without responding, signaling the jailer to secure the door. As we stepped back into the cool corridor, he mumbled, "He confirms what we suspected, Watson. He was only the symptom. The sickness is deeper." We emerged into pale brightness as the fog began to lift from the city. Holmes went quickly, head bowed and lips moving in silent calculation. Finally, he replied, "The key is in the documents we took from Carroll. They were more sophisticated than Haldane's notes and too complex for his hand alone. Someone else provided that refinement." Back at Baker Street, he spread the schematics out once more on the table. I identified sketches of mirrors, prisms, and lanterns, but alongside them were remarks in a different script, neater, more assured. Holmes compared them to Haldane's scribbling and nodded curtly. "As I expected. This is the touch of an experienced engineer, not a feverish visionary. Also note that several measures are in metric units, rather than the English scale. That points us east." Before dusk, another telegraph arrived, this one from Vienna. It mentioned a certain Dr. Stefan Orloff, a Russian émigré famed for his optical studies, who had recently disappeared from his lodgings and was thought to have gone to London under a false name. Holmes' eyes glittered. The spider finally reveals his thread. Orloff is not a visionary, but a man of real science. If he has joined this operation, Haldane is merely a facade to mislead us while Orloff works undetected. That night, Holmes and I returned to the Blackfriars warehouse, accompanied by Lestrade. It had been secured since Carroll's detention, but Holmes demanded a more comprehensive search. With his lantern, he investigated the beams, flooring, and concealed alcoves. Finally, he discovered a buried room behind one of the benches. Within lay a metal case, meticulously packed with vials of crystalline powder, sketches more detailed than any we had seen before, and a solitary letter in French, unsigned but sealed with the now familiar triangle. Holmes read it aloud, his voice low. The first trials were successful. The harness works, but stability requires refined salt. Get the catalyst from your English solicitor. We will soon be moving to Paris, where finances and protection await. Delay is dangerous. He folded the letter gingerly. You see, Watson, we stand not at the close but the middle of a campaign. The Cabal's theatre changes as easily as an actor's clothing. Tonight London, tomorrow Paris. If we do not cut the cord now, it may strangle Europe entirely. Lestrade's expression was dismal. Then we must alert the French police. Holmes shakes his head. Too blunt an instrument. If we sound the alarm, the conspirators scatter like birds, each pursuing their work elsewhere. It is better to follow silently and understand their entire extent before attacking. And you intend to follow to Paris? I asked. His eyes glowed in the lamplight. If necessary, certainly. For the shadowless man is no more a lonely marvel, but rather the herald of a time when crime might be disguised as light. Such an age must be strangled upon birth. We left the warehouse with the case secured, the river glinting slightly in the moonlight beyond. As we drove back to Baker Street, Holmes sat silently, his gaze fixated on the black horizon as if calculating the distance to Paris. Finally he spoke, more to himself than to me. The game changes, Watson. We pursued a man. Now we must seek a concept across borders. In such a pursuit, patience is the most effective weapon. I slept little that night because my dreams were filled with images of cities without shadows, men moving like wraiths through lamplight, and Holmes's solemn face bent above the deadly pages. It was clear that the story of the man who never cast a shadow had spread beyond London's foggy streets. We stood on the verge of a quest that promised no easy ending, only deeper mystery and more danger. And as dawn broke pale and uncertain over the city, Holmes, already at his desk, looked up and said quietly, "Pack your bags, Watson. The continent awaits us." The train drew us south through the cool morning mist, its iron wheels drumming a rhythm that seemed to echo Holmes's own taut resolve. He hadn't said much since being told to pack, but it wasn't because he was tired. It was because he was arranging his thoughts on a board larger than London. I watched him sit with his arms folded, eyes half closed, a faint smile on his lips as the countryside blurred past. To the untrained eye, he might have appeared asleep. I knew better. By noon we had arrived at Dover, and the sea stretched grey and restless before us. Holmes stood at the packet steamer's rail, his gaze fixed on the horizon, where the French coast moved like a shadow. "Watson," he said quietly, "what we're after isn't just a man or a cabal, but a thought contagion. It has found expression in Haldane, refinement in Orloff, and finance in men whose names we have not yet learned. If we strike blindly, we will only wound one limb while the rest of the body will thrive. To sever the root, we must first determine its depth." Paris greeted us with a unique blend of brilliance and menace. The boulevards sparkled with electric lights, and Holmes speculated that the shadowless trick might find eager customers among the cabarets and exhibitions. However, behind the glamour were narrow streets where conspiracies thrived like mold in damp stone. We took modest lodgings near the Gare du Nord, with Holmes explaining that anonymity was now our shield. Our first contact was with Inspector Dubois of the Sûreté, a man with sharp features and even sharper courtesy. He had received advance notice from Lestrade and greeted Holmes with obvious respect. "You pursue a dangerous quarry, monsieur," he said gravely. "Already whispers have reached us about demonstrations, lanterns that erase the very outline of a man. Such wonders pique the interest of onlookers, but I fear they serve a darker purpose." Holmes tilted his head. "Then we must investigate where the whispers congregate. I would like to request access to your informants among the lanternists and theatrical suppliers. There we'll find our trail." For 2 days, Holmes and I walked around the city, speaking with optical novelty vendors, questioning stagehands in music halls, and tracking mirror and chemical shipments. Slowly a pattern emerged. Monsieur Lambert, an unknown gentleman, had purchased several consignments of a peculiar crystalline powder, known only as sels blancs in ledgers. Always he paid in gold, always he demanded secrecy. One such purchase had been made not a week earlier, delivered to a warehouse on the Rue des Récollets. Holmes's eyes lit with the spark of pursuit. "There, Watson, is our Fox's new earth. Tonight we shall pay it a call." The building was unremarkable, its shutters closed, its courtyard empty. Yet as dusk fell, we observed faint glows seeping through cracks in the boards. Unnatural glows, too steady for candles, too white for gas. Holmes motioned me close. "They experiment even now. We must enter unseen." With the practiced silence of a cat, he scaled the low wall, and I followed, my heart pounding. At the door he produced slender tools, and within moments the lock yielded. We slipped inside, the air thick with the reek of sulphur and heated metal. What we beheld within froze me where I stood. The chamber was arranged like a theatre, benches set before a screen. Upon it danced grotesque shapes, figures without shadows, forms that flickered and dissolved as if untethered from substance. At the center stood a tall man with shaven head and commanding presence, adjusting a harness of mirrors strapped to a mannequin. His voice rang with authority. "When perfected, this device shall render armies invisible, envoys untouchable, assassins unseen. Power lies not in cannon, but in light." Holmes gripped my arm. "Orloff," he whispered. "The true master." Around the benches sat 6 men of varied appearance, bankers by their dress, perhaps politicians by their bearing. They watched with rapt attention as Orloff demonstrated the distortion of shadows, the vanishing of outlines. One muttered, "With this no fortress stands secure." Another, "We shall change the balance of Europe." Holmes's jaw tightened. "You see, Watson? Not science alone, but politics. Orloff sells his shadowless dream as a weapon. That is why Haldane served as mask, to distract us while the true stage was prepared here." Before I could reply, a floorboard creaked beneath my boot. Orloff's head snapped round. "Who is there?" he barked. The lamps flared and the shadows on the wall twisted grotesquely. Holmes seized my sleeve. "Too soon, Watson. We must withdraw." But already 2 of Orloff's men were moving toward us. Holmes flung open the door and we bolted into the night, pursued by shouts. Through alleys we ran, the glow of lanterns at our backs, until at last Holmes guided me into a narrow passage where darkness swallowed us whole. We leaned against the wall, breathless. Holmes's eyes shone even in the gloom. "We have seen enough. Orloff is no mere visionary. He courts patrons of influence, men who will pay for his invention with coin and protection. To strike him here is perilous. We must first gather proof. And how, I asked, when he knows we are upon him? By turning his own brilliance against him. He trusts light to cloak his secrets. Very well. We shall make light the instrument of his downfall." The following day, Holmes sought Dubois, laying before him a careful account of what we had witnessed. The inspector paled, yet nodded grimly. "Without proof the law cannot act. But give us evidence, a ledger, a plate, a witness, and we shall strike." Holmes's gaze hardened with resolve. "Then tonight we return to the warehouse. Orloff believes himself master of light. Let us show him that shadows may yet betray him." As we prepared, I felt the weight of what lay ahead. The chase had begun with a single man in London, a phantom who cast no shadow. Now it had broadened into a struggle across borders, a contest not only of wits but of nations. And at the heart of it all moved Holmes, tireless, relentless, determined to bring truth to light, even as others sought to bury it in darkness. That night, as the lamps of Paris flickered in the mist, Holmes tightened his cloak and murmured, "The game nears its climax, Watson. But beware, for when men tamper with shadows, they may find themselves swallowed by them." And with that we set forth once more into the city, toward the warehouse where light itself had been forged into a weapon, and where Holmes intended to turn the conspirators' own brilliance into the means of their undoing. The night air brushed wet on our faces as we reached the warehouse for the final time. Paris lay silent, her lamps glimmering weakly through mist. unconscious that within one shuttered structure, men plotted to rob it of its shadow. Holmes proceeded with unwavering confidence, his slender figure sliding over the alley walls, every stride carefully considered. I followed closely, gun in hand, my pulse pounding from the realization that this would be the last play. Through a breach in the shutters we saw Orloff once more, his bald head glittering in the lamplight, as he exhibited the harness before his assembled guests. The deformed figure on the screen moved, dissolved and disappeared. A murmur of wonder echoed throughout the room. Holmes then implemented his strategy. He took a little mirror from his pocket and polished it to a brilliant shine. With a quick movement, he aimed it toward a lamp positioned in the courtyard, directing a narrow beam through a breach in the boards. The light struck the equipment on the mannequin, causing a rapid conflagration throughout the room. The illusion faltered at once, with the contour of the figure regaining clarity and its shadow returning in sharp relief. The financiers gasped, half rising from their seats. Holmes pushed open the door, his voice sharp as a sword. "Gentlemen, witness the truth. Shadows are devoted to physics, not charlatans. When exposed to honest light, the ploy fails." Orloff whirled around, wrath burning in his eyes. "You meddle where nations profit," he shouted. He grasped the harness, but the illumination from Holmes' mirror dazzled him, and Dubois and his men stormed the chamber, having been hidden up until then. Cries rang out, chairs toppled, and diners were apprehended in their surprise before they could run. Orloff fought like a caged beast, straining the strap over his torso and activating a concealed switch. For a minute he appeared to dissolve in his own glow, his shape swaying like heat on stone. But Holmes anticipated the action and adjusted the mirror, flooding him with unbroken light. The distortion broke, showing Orloff for who he truly was, sweat-soaked, frantic, and suddenly very mortal. He sagged when the gendarmes clamped handcuffs on his wrists. The financiers, robbed of their illusions, reacted furiously, claiming ignorance and shouting that they were duped. Holmes regarded them with chilly contempt. Men who buy shadows cannot claim innocence when they are caught in the light. Later, as the prisoners were led away and the apparatus disassembled, Holmes and I stood with Dubois in the quietened hall. The inspector grabbed Holmes's hand with deep reverence. "Monsieur, Paris is indebted to you. Without your intervention, these men could have jeopardized Europe's very safety." Holmes tilted his head. "The debt, Inspector, belongs to reason, not to me. When folks abandon reason for ambition, they create monsters out of trifles. Our goal is just to remind them that truth is not easily distorted." We returned to London several days later, the city as dark and restless as when we had left it. Haldane remained in Newgate, broken in spirit after learning of Orloff's demise. Penruddock, relieved of his load, promised to return the document to its guards in Prague and never again entice the curious. As for Holmes, he continued playing his violin with quiet focus, the sound drifting through Baker Street tinged with sadness. I asked him once, as we sat together before the fire, if he thought the threat was over. He lowered the bow and looked at me with those piercing eyes. "Has it ended, Watson?" "No, contained, possibly. However, once loosed, ideas travel like seeds on the wind. Some will fall upon barren soil, others may possibly take root. It is our responsibility to be cautious, because crime is constantly evolving, and there will always be persons who mistake ingenuity for knowledge." He resumed his guitar, the deep tones filling the room as if in concentration. I sat back and watched the shadows flicker over the wall, grateful for their existence. And as the night became darker, I realized that even if Holmes had restored the balance, the memory of those shadowless forms would never truly dissipate. But I also knew that as long as he lived, there would be no darkness, no matter how crafty, that could not be confronted and destroyed by his bright, steadfast light of thought.